Digitalization is becoming an integral part of agriculture.
Der Klimawandel ist eine große Herausforderung, die auf uns zukommt. Wir sind die Ersten, die davon betroffen sind, weil wir arbeiten mit und nicht gegen die Natur. Und natürlich erwarte ich mir da dementsprechende Lösungen, die mir am Betrieb helfen, diese Challenges der Zukunft, nämlich auch Produktionseffizienz zu erreichen.
One of the main challenges is the enormous amount of fertilizer being used unspecifically. The Josephinum in Wieselburg in Lower Austria has faced this challenge with its apps Terrazzo and Gisela.
In dem Projekt geht es um die teilflächenspezifische Bewirtschaftung, im Speziellen so, dass der Landwirt genauso viel Stickstoff auf die Felder ausbringen, wie die Pflanze aufnehmen kann. Der Landwirt in dieser Ausbaustufe braucht keine zusätzlichen Investitionen außer Tablet. Alle anderen Services stehen kostenlos zur Verfügung.
In der Vergangenheit habe ich mit meinem visuellen Auge darauf reagiert, auf die unterschiedlichen Bestände. Nur mittlerweile hilft mir das Tablet dabei, ganz einfach auf meinen Düngestreuer und auf meinen Traktor diese Technologie anzuwenden. Bei mir im Betrieb hat sich das verändert, dass ich genauer kalkulieren kann, wie viel Dünger das ich dementsprechend benötige und kann den Bestand bedarfsgerecht düngen. Das bedeutet, ich kann genauso ökologischer und ökonomischer zugleich sein, indem dass ich mir Dünger einspare auf der einen Seite und auf der anderen Seite die beste Qualität für die jeweilige Teilfläche auf meinem Feld erwirtschafte.
Another challenge Austria is facing is the huge number of wild animals being injured and killed by mowers.
Ein realistischer Richtwert wären ca. 25.000 Rehkitze allein in Österreich, die durch Mähwerke verletzt oder sogar getötet werden. Werden diese Rehkitze beim Mähen verletzt oder verenden gleich an Ort und Stelle, kommen diese später ins Futter und dort kann es durch die Kadaverteile entweder zu schlechterer Milchleistung kommen oder eben auch zum Tod der Tiere. Wir scannen mit diesem System jetzt die Fläche rechts vom Traktor, also die Fläche, die auch ein paar Sekunden später gemäht wird. Mit einem Nahinfrarotsignal werden die Wildtiere aufgrund der Farbgebung erkannt. Einmal hat das System ausgelöst und plötzlich hat es vor mir kurz einmal geraschelt und ein Rehkitz hat die Flucht ergriffen und genauso war es auch einmal bei einem Feldhasen und ich hätte keine Chance gehabt, dass ich den aus der Traktorkabine aus erkannt hätte.
Weed control in vineyards is a huge issue. It takes time, manpower, and a lot of pesticides, polluting the environment. That's why they invented this prototype.
Wir befinden uns hier im Josephinum Research in unserer Werkstatt, wo unser Weinbauroboter Dionysos entsteht. Sobald der Roboter oder das Mähaggregat auf einen Weinstock trifft, klappt es nach hinten. Somit können wir den Bereich zwischen zwei Reben oder Weinstöcken vom Beikraut frei halten. Es geht darum, bei diesem Projekt will man den Herbizideinsatz, also sprich in erster Linie Glyphosat, minimieren. Bis jetzt war das Feedback sehr gut. Es wartet eigentlich jeder darauf, dass so ein System auf den Markt kommt.
Climate change enforces extreme weather like heavy rain, which in turn causes soil erosion. That's exactly why digital help is much needed.
Mit unserem Tool Soilcover können wir mit einer simplen Kamera, zum Beispiel einem Handy, die Bodenbedeckung objektiv messen. Grundsätzlich ist die Bodenbedeckung sehr schwer einzuschätzen und der Landwirt hat dann eben ein objektives Tool zur Verfügung, um das zu messen. Wir sehen da jetzt das Bild, das wir vom Boden aufgenommen haben. Wir sehen, die Bodenbedeckung ist relativ gering. Wenn wir uns dann das Klassifizierungsergebnis anschauen, sehen wir genau, in welchem Bildbereich sich Pflanzen und tote organische Masse wie Stroh befinden und kann der Computer jetzt genau die prozentuelle Bodenbedeckung berechnen. Und wenn ich jetzt messen kann, wie viel Bodenbedeckung ich habe, dann habe ich eben auch ein Tool in der Hand, um die Bodenbedeckung zu erhöhen und um die Bewirtschaftung zu verbessern und dadurch den Boden zu schützen vor dem Klimawandel.
Yeah, pretty impressive what can be done with digitalization. Let's talk about it. Smart world, green life is our theme for this discussion. I'd like to welcome our guests here on the podium. I'll give you a quick introduction, again, one by one, starting on the right, on my right, your left, from the audience point of view. Keiwan Ryahi, he is a climate scientist. Ilka Horstmeier, she is a board member of the BMW Group. On my left, Johanna Mikl-Leitner, governor of Lower Austria, and Stephen Schurman, or Schurman, if I pronounce it correctly, sort of, Dutch. He is an entrepreneur and philanthropist. Tell us how you pronounce your name correctly.
Is this yeah, it's working. Schuurman.
Okay, but
you did pretty well.
You told me before we can use the English pronunciation of
Absolutely.
Schuurman.
Go for it.
Joining us virtually from New York is Gavin McCormick, behind me on the screen, and from California, Rejma Kozaraju. Welcome to our discussions here in Vienna. Governor Mikl-Leitner, I'd like to start with you. You're the governor of the province of Lower Austria. Most of the examples we have seen in this film come from Lower Austria. We just watched some. You support digitalization. Why is it a key issue for you? And can you give us some more examples? Because I know there are some more in Lower Austria.
Ja, ich glaube, dieser Film hat auf beeindruckende Art und Weise
I think this film has shown in an impressive way that our farmers are not working against but with nature, that they bet on digitalization and they want to use digitalization to increase the ecological as well as economic efficiency of what they do. We've seen some wind turbines. 56% of all wind turbines of Austria are located in Lower Austria, so we are ranked number one here, and of course we continue to bet on wind power, repowering, and also new buildings. And I think this picture and this film has shown that it's important to invest in research and technology in order to move agriculture even more in the direction of ecology. And of course there are a lot of examples. Let me just think of my stay in Berlin, the science fair, Fall in Wall, where we have a lot of challenges in terms of climate change. This leads to a drying out of soils and a shortage of water. And in Berlin, we discussed with a couple of scientists. We attended a trade show where young scientists from all over the globe had been invited to present their projects and innovations. And our scientists presented a granulate that can be put into the soil 10 centimeters underneath on the surface of the soil, and it can store water and give off the moisture when it's dry. That way, dry soils can remain fruitful longer. These are just a couple of examples, and the House of Digitalization wants to be part of the solution. We have built a platform for the economy and for research, and the heart piece of this House of Digitalization is a showroom where joint projects of science and business are showcased in order to show how digitalization can make our lives more livable and what solutions are out there in order to combat climate change. So a very interesting project, and in the city of Tulln, where this House of Digitalization will be standing, well, we want to turn Tulln into a smart city. And of course we are cooperating very intensively, the House of Digitalization, with the city. And there are two concrete projects, smart parking. So it's about using artificial intelligence and sensors to ensure that we will need fewer parking spaces in order to have more land for other purposes. We are also going to plant a lot of trees that will also be linked with a moisture sensor. So they are only going to get water, will be irrigated whenever it is really needed, so that we are going to deal with water in a very resource-conserving way. This House of Digitalization can make an important contribution, and the European Union has given us also an award for this project, and this is a wonderful recognition.
When will this House of Digitalization in Tulln be, inaugurated?
Es wird auf alle Fälle öffnen.
Well, it will be opening at the beginning of next year.
Next year we'll sit here and we'll hear about how it's been working. We'll hear all about it.
Ja, ich bin fest davon überzeugt, Sie können es nächstes Jahr erleben. Und wenn ich mal
Yes, I'm sure you can see it next year for yourself, and I hope that during the next Austrian World Summit you can also have a direct line from the House of Digitalization here to the Hofburg Imperial Palace, because then all of you can actually experience the House of Digitalization.
Ilka Horstmeier, you are board member of the BMW Group. The automotive industry has been part of the problem historically, but you or the industry is investing in billions moving towards net zero. Tell us about this transformation process, in particular, of course, how digitalization helps with the BMW Group.
Thank you, and maybe you allow me a very personal comment for the beginning, because for me it's a very special moment in time, because 30 years ago I had the chance as a student to be at the Earth Summit at Rio de Janeiro. And I was quite inspired by this immersive experience there, and it really pushed me. So 30 years later now, I'm in the position to drive transformation at BMW, and you mentioned it already, BMW is going digital, electric and circular. And the technological transformation is one side of it, but it's also a people side on the other side. And I think for me, as a people manager of BMW, it's quite important that we balance this. And it's not only about us, the car manufacturers, but it's also about the whole supply chain. So coming back to your question, I think it's quite important, and you all know this, replacing combustion engines by electrical engines is not the solution to more sustainable mobility. So we have to really rethink the whole supply chain, including renewable energies we need for the production of the components, and of course circularity. And this is something nobody can do alone. So we need partners in the industry, we need partners in our supply chain, and we need, of course, IT solutions. And therefore, we co-initiated the Catena X project. It's a scientifically supported project of the European car manufacturers in cooperation with all our suppliers and with IT companies. And the aim is to really have an end-to-end data transparency of all the data of the components we have, from the cobalt mine and mining process up to the recycling. And why is it important? Because 70% of the whole value chain is created at suppliers. So to have this transparency, we have the opportunity to really optimize the supply chain and the CO2 footprint in the supply chain. And on the other hand, of course, to really cope or to really meet our own standards with regard to transparency in achieving our targets. So I truly believe, not only in other industries, but also in our industry, digitalization is one of the greatest enablers driving that transformation to towards sustainability.
Let's hear from a scientist. Keiwan Riyahi, you're one of the most renowned climate scientists. You're based here in Vienna. You work at the IASA. Can you share some examples of how digitalization helps combating climate change?
So in principle, digitalization can help across the board with many different measures. So we just heard how digitalization can make supply chains more efficient. I think the most striking need for digitalization is particularly at the demand side. So we need to find out how can we basically keep high quality of services and allow basically high well-being, and decoupling the economy from increasing energy and material use. And for that, we need to switch and fundamentally change our demand systems We need to switch to a new system where sharing becomes more common. And sharing is only possible if we also have digitalization. So basically, if we have very smart appliances, very smart ways of providing new services, and those new appliances are connected to each other. They know from each other. In mobility, this could mean that basically in the future, mobility is not provided by this typical ownership system at the moment, where you have your own car, which is in front of your house. In the future, there will be a connected and integrated system which knows which mode of mobility to use in order to get fastest from A to B with the best quality. And usually this is not your car. So there are numerous different scientific studies that show you that with 3 to 4% of the infrastructure, you can provide a better mobility in the cities than the car. So instead of congesting the streets and polluting them, you can free them from cars and get better from A to B, green the city, give back basically space also for social interaction, and all that will only be possible if you really use digitalization as a tool in order to change the demand systems.
But it is already happening in a lot of cities, at least. You know, people are beginning to create zones where you have maybe even some cars still, but basically where the city goes back to the people who live there.
Yeah, it could, but it could go much further. You could think about the street where basically you don't have cars parked anymore because they are 90% idle, right? And just imagine how many rows and how much space you would free up if the car would just not stand there. It would be, as we heard earlier also, a world, I think, with a higher quality of life at the end.
Yes, go ahead.
Can I quickly comment on that? I think it's quite important to see that digitalization can really help to find the best mobility solutions. And I think mobility solutions shouldn't compete, but they should add on. And as you said, maybe a car in the city is not the best solution, and we totally agree on that. But people maybe commute from outside and then make a choice to go into the city with any other mobility solution. And I think to come up with these kind of practical solutions via digitalization and connecting data from different suppliers of mobility concepts, that would be a great thing. And I think many cities already do, and we support that heavily.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to go to a concrete example now. I'd like to go to Gavin McCormick. Thank you for joining us in the middle of the night for joining us from New York. You are a co-founder of Climate Trace. And as I've said before, you're a concrete example of using digitalization. Explain what you are doing, how you use big data and AI to measure CO2 emissions.
Sure. So good morning. And Climate Trace is a coalition of about 50 collaborating NGOs, universities, and tech companies around the world. And what we do is apply artificial intelligence to satellite imagery. So we have known as a planet for a long time that climate change is happening. This is well understood by science. It's surprisingly not well understood exactly where all those emissions are coming from. So what we are building as a large group of experts who are applying AI to satellite imagery is a global system to be able to monitor what is every source of emissions from every industry. So we are doing things like looking at power plants from space, detecting things like the steam coming out of them as a good proxy for CO2. We are monitoring cars, ships, and planes worldwide. So this was too big a project for any one organization, but what we've discovered in terms of connecting data sets is if enough organizations connect enough data, it actually becomes possible to visualize from space every single source of greenhouse gas emissions on the planet and make that available and transparent, much like Wikipedia, to the entire world, so that we can start to do more concrete things like optimizing electric vehicles for times when there is less pollution, or optimizing factories and supply chains to be sourcing products from cleaner suppliers. So it's a large shared project of science that we hope will make it easier to reduce emissions by knowing just where they come from.
Thank you, Gavin. We'll go back to you in just a few minutes. I'd like to ask Stephen Sherman, entrepreneur and philanthropist. You're coming from the tech field. You support environmental action. You support climate action. You also help children with a foundation. How do you do that, and why do you see that as important?
Well, to my mind, what is more important than children and the future of humanity, right? The thing is, I built a few technology companies, had a fair amount of success, and a few years ago decided that I'm done building tech companies. I want to do something that's significantly more important, and that was basically support future generations. And what I've seen is that one of the biggest threats, of course, is the climate crisis, which to my mind is in fact a climate crisis which is about to cause a massive humanitarian crisis. And I also think that it's actually important to not view the climate crisis only as a climate issue, but also really think very carefully about what this is ultimately causing for our children. Because if we think that things are bad right now today for us, which they already are, extrapolate 10, 20, 30, 50 or 100 years, it's going to get way, way, way worse for all of us. So how do we create solutions? Well, one of the things that I did was found an organization called International Center for Future Generations, which is a think and do tank. And we basically do two things. One of the things that we are heavily involved in is basically helping policymakers and decision makers have access to information, basically allowing them to make better decisions. And one of the other things that we do is we're all over the world involved with something that I was shocked to find out a few years ago that basically nobody does, is we support the youth movement because we feel like there is so much value in having very young youth activists, also from the global south, give them a voice, and there's not that many people that support them, so that is effectively what we're all about.
Thank you. Let's go to a young woman who is already very skilled in the digital world. That's Reshma Kozaraju. I see her behind me. She is joining us virtually from California. Good morning to you, and also thank you for getting up early or staying up late. You have designed a model to predict forest fires based on artificial intelligence, AI against forest fires, you call it. Tell us about your model. What is it able to predict, and how are you doing this?
Yeah, of course. So thank you so much for having me. And well, as you all know, forest fires are an immediate problem for people, the flora and fauna of our planet, and of course, the environment in general, because they actually form a positive feedback loop with the rest of the process of climate change. And this is one of the biggest issues that's making it harder and harder for firefighters to effectively control forest fires. So with the increasing global temperatures and the other secondary effects of climate change, forest fires are getting not only more frequent, but also more severe each time. And the main issue with detection right now is that, well, first of all the solutions that are trying to address forest fires, they're detection-based, meaning that once the forest fire has already occurred, we're trying to find ways to effectively not only notice them, but then also to get firefighters out there so they can control them effectively. But so some of the main methods that are being used to detect forest fires are extremely expensive, and the technology that's being used can be impacted by weather conditions such as fog or heavy rain. And they're not very timely interventions, since the time of detection and the time of response, there's often a gap between those. So what I noticed was that all of these methods are focusing on detection, and that's not really effective right now. So I wanted to find a predictive method that would be able to give firefighters notice before the forest fire actually occurred, so that they could go out and be prepared to deploy troops and resources to immediately address the forest fire that's occurring. So in order to do this, I developed a machine learning-based model using neural networks to predict these forest fires using the meteorological data that's coming from various locations And so the way I'm doing this is by using automatic weather stations, which are pieces of technology that are already located all around the world for climate tracking purposes. And these take in meteorological data such as temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, moisture content in the soil. And so by having these various meteorological parameters, we can feed them into the artificial intelligence model, and this can predict whether or not there will be a chance of a forest fire occurring. And so it's already very easy for not only firefighters, but also everyday people to use. Since there's a user interface, they can just put in these parameters and they'll get a prediction within minutes of whether or not there'll be a chance of a forest fire occurring in their area.
Wow, Reshma. Pretty amazing. You can tell by the applause here. It's also truly important. Please stay with us. We'll go back to you later. Fires, like all natural disasters, are a huge challenge also for the insurance industries. And at this point, I'd like to go to a man in the audience here, Rémi Vrignon. He is the CEO of Allianz Austria, which is a big insurance company. Big data, new technology, where does the financial industry come in? How can you help move towards a climate neutral future?
Thank you, Hannelore. Yes, indeed. As an insurer and asset manager, it matters where to invest. And we are convinced that the capital our clients entrust to us is the biggest and strongest lever to make a difference. It makes a difference whether we invest into sustainable companies, into sustainable investments and assets, and indeed digitalization, when we're talking about the whole transformation of our society, about mobility, about electric vehicles. We are investing and really stepping into these new technologies and assets, investing into startups, investing into a market leadership in ensuring electric vehicles. We want and are aiming for this position, contributing to a, let's say, better world with the means we have. Now, when it comes to our local initiatives, we definitely are investing huge amounts into artificial intelligence, automation, especially in the relationship with our clients. To give you a very simple example, in the last 10 years, we achieved to reduce 350 tons of paper. It's just amazing in our industry how old-fashioned we are communicating with our clients. 350 tons of paper. If you pile them up, you reach 7,000 meters. So with small things, you can move mountains, let's say mountains of paper. Just a small example. And together, we can be stronger and make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We can see that companies, NGOs relying on digital data and tools can advance climate action. Reshma, I'd like to go back to you. Yes, you're still here. Looking to the future, what are your next plans? Where do you want to go from here?
Yeah, great question. So my next steps are actually having to do with truly globalizing my model. So right now, the data that I have for my model that I've used to train it has mostly come from specific areas of the US where there's already a lot of data about forest fires that have occurred, because using this data, that's how I've been able to have my model differentiate between conditions that would create a forest fire and conditions that wouldn't. So right now, I'm mostly looking to gather data from other regions of the world, especially regions like Australia, where they're very, very forest fire prone, but there isn't. But I'm not able to find much data about that's publicly available about meteorological conditions and the associated outcome of whether or not a forest fire occurs, And so that's one of my main steps, is gathering data from various regions of the world so that this model can truly become globalized and accessible. And on the issue of accessibility, I'm also looking to develop this model, once it's been improved with the new data, into a mobile application or a web-based application that anyone can reach from their smartphone or laptop, or basically any device that is able to connect to some sort of internet.
So if I understand you correctly, what you need is data. I wonder if we can help here. And Gavin, I'm looking at you. Can you help there with your big data project?
I think we can. If I've understood correctly here, we do have access to global forest fire data, and it's true, we don't have a predictive model. We only have a measurement of what has happened, but we have it for every location on the globe at 1 kilometer resolution. So Reshka, if that's interesting to you, we can absolutely provide you with that open data, and if that could help you globalize your model, we'd be delighted to.
Wonderful, thank you. You've earned your big round of applause. And we at the Austrian World Summit, of course, we love to connect people. So thank you both, and good luck for the future. Keiwan Riahi, I'd like to go back to you. We've heard about chances and opportunities of digitalization. As a climate scientist, where do you see the risks? Do you see any?
Yeah, so basically digitalization can help us to increase the efficiency of the processes and provide services with lower resource inputs. At the same time, and I think the jury is out here, digitalization can be the source of lots of energy-intensive new services. So if you think about digital currencies which require lots of energy to maintain Bitcoin, or if you think about the increasing energy use of entertainment and communication, I think there needs to be a balance found here between these new services that emerge. Particularly if you think about autonomous new devices, they can also create new services. I mean, to give you perhaps an extreme example, I think we are not so far away for having drones which can fly autonomously, either for cargo or for people. And now imagine a future where our children and our grandchildren would fly with a drone into a very congested city. So basically we would find a new space, the sky, to have congestion. And these are this type of new innovations which have also their risks. I think most importantly, we need to find a solution to the data itself. So the data is a very, very valuable resource. We are going in Europe into the direction where data safety is first. I think many of the solutions will not be possible if we are extremely restrictive in terms of sharing data. So we need to find a way to anonymize data and to share it effectively. And we need also to regulate who is the owner of the data. So companies who collect the data need to be forced to share the data, because data is a public good. It should be there for the society, not for company profits, so to say. And with that democratization, I think you also can work against the risks that data is used for, let's say, increasing consumption, or perhaps even in the worst case, manipulating people to increase consumption, right? So these are I would say, it's a double-bladed sword, digitalization, and we need to make it very cutting in one direction and very soft in the other direction.
Let's go to the man from the tech industry, Stephen Sherman. Given your background, where do you see the biggest chances for digitalization as far as climate action is concerned?
Yeah, I think that there's a few ways to look at this. I believe that, as my colleague on the other end of this line already said, look, there is a lot of data out there. Mm-hmm. We see it within companies, within governments, within NGOs. There's so much data out there, and as some of the people on the video conference were already doing, they're basically using data to create solutions. What I think is that on the one hand, one of the main opportunities is that in data lie answers, but we need to find them, which means that we need to analyze the data that we have within our organizations to really, truly, fundamentally understand where can we optimize. This counts actually for consumers and for companies to lower our footprint. So that is one thing. The second thing I believe is that we also use digital technology and data to develop new solutions, right? For example, one of the emerging technologies that we see in the world of combating the climate crisis is geothermal energy generation. But we need massive amounts of data to actually be able to find out where to drill, how to extract that energy out of the earth. And I think that digital technology is very, very powerful there. And I think thirdly, and maybe lastly, there's a lot of solutions hidden in the data that we don't know yet, right? And we're living in a world where we start working towards autonomous learning systems that can actually also, in the future, will probably help us find solutions that we're not yet aware of. So I think there's actually a lot of opportunity for digital technology to help us combat the climate crisis.
Thank you. Ilka Horstmeier, BMW circular economy is a highly relevant topic for you. What are your plans? What are your visions?
I think our vision stands right down there in the Hofburg. It's the BMW iVision Circular. It's a car made out of 100% recycled material, and it's 100% recyclable. This is what we are heading for, and I think with all we talked just right now, I think we can see that we are in the middle of the biggest transformation, I don't know, of our time, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's not only about the car industry, it's about many industries, it's about governments, it's really a lot of change at the moment. And it's in a challenging environment. I think a couple of years ago we were talking about VUCA world, and nobody really knew what VUCA means. I think now, at the moment, everybody knows what VUCA means. And for us at BMW, it's quite important, and maybe it's not only for BMW, that we not only take care of our people, but also take care of our leaders, because they have to drive this transformation. And the task for leaders in these times is, first of all, to handle both issues at the same time. They have to handle current crises. Yeah. They have to handle, for example, the chip and semiconductor situation. They have to chase each and every semiconductor at the moment, 24/7. Other people, other leaders have to supply food and water to our people who are locked down in China for more than a month. And these kind of things are happening. At the same time, people have to come up with strategies for the future, drive transformation towards digitalization and sustainability. So it's really a huge task for each and every leader in the company. The second thing, of course, is that you have to withstand and cope with conflicting priorities. Mostly, I think it's not the question of or, it's a question of both and. And I think the companies that will be in the future, will be successful in the future, are the companies who can solve these conflicts. For example, efficiency and dynamics for a car company is not an or, it's a both and. Or tech magicness and human centricity, which we didn't tackle today, but I think that's another issue which we really have to solve. It's not an or, it's a both and. And the third thing, I mentioned it already at the very beginning, you need to have, as a leader, a real people focus in these times. You have to imagine that all our people at the moment come from a 2-year period of COVID, jumping into a horrible war in Europe. This touches them very emotionally. And I think as a leader, you have to show empathy. You have to talk to the people. The second thing is, of course, you have to be very inspiring to let these people really move towards the future. And I can tell you, we have a lot of people in BMW who are friends of Fridays of Future, but they're working at BMW because they want to come up with solutions for the future. They develop recyclable floor mats, they develop leatherless or mini seats without leather, and they are really committed. And I think leadership now is to inspire these people to work on solutions. And last but not least, of course, it's about trust. Because in my experience, people work for companies, but they trust people.
We do live in interesting times. Thank you. I see Gavin McCormick is still here. You are collecting big data. Why is measuring emissions so important?
I couldn't agree more. It's about solutions. And so I think what has been really interesting to me to see is in the history of energy efficiency, we know, for example, that the state of California in the United States would have twice as much pollution right now if we had not gotten so intelligent at optimizing energy efficiency. But we really have not done the same thing with emissions. So I think there are a surprising number of new technologies that are about to become possible as we get higher and higher quality data on emissions. A nice example that I like is if you build a new wind farm today in Sweden, or you build the exact same wind farm in Poland, the wind farm in Poland reduces twice as much emissions in the real world as the exact same wind farm in Sweden, not because it's windier, but because when you add new renewable energy, if you understand very precisely what power plants is it replacing, often you are replacing a coal plant instead of replacing a mix of natural gas and renewable energy. And so as we start to have better and better data, we can start to find ways that instead of just doing business as usual, we can start to find ways that you can reduce more emissions with the same costs. So we're seeing technologies like automating smart thermostats to times of more wind and solar, shutting down coal plants that it turns out it's more profitable to replace with renewable energy, and in the political arena, supporting countries that have had a hard time monitoring their emissions very precisely. The whole heart of the Paris Agreement is supposed to be transparency, but there are countries that it's been 20 years since they had a complete inventory of all the emissions in their country. Think about how difficult it is for a policymaker to know which policies work when you have to wait 20 years to get an answer. So I believe that as we are allowing many governments, many companies, and many activists and scientists to think, what are tomorrow's solutions? Having very, very precise data right away on what happens is going to open up more new technologies than we've even thought of yet.
Thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Gavin McCormick. And thank you, Reshma Kusaraju, for joining us. Goodbye and get some rest in New York and in California. Thank you for being with us. I'd like to go back to you for a final round. Going back to the House of Digitalization, are you working with the business sector? Are you working with the industry? Are you reaching out to stakeholders? And as we here at the Austrian World Summit try to connect people, could you see in the people we have talked to today, are there some future participants in the House of Digitalization maybe?
Ja, ich glaube, wir alle haben eines gemeinsam, nämlich das Ziel, uns zu vernetzen und
we all have a goal in common to make the world a better place, to have an exchange, to link up, and many of those people are here, like for example Allianz Insurance, and in the rural area, in municipalities with fewer than 5,000 inhabitants, we work on the development of glass fiber broadband in order to push digitalization. Or if, for example, I think about Accent, our incubator, who promotes 150 startups per year, or thinking about all the panelists and everyone can make their contribution for our House of Digitization, thinking about BMW, Ms. Horstmeier, high-tech, mobility, hydrogen. So we can do many things together, thinking about the fact that in Tulln we're working on a mobility concept right now, concentrating on first and last mile, all the way to the railway station, an on-demand shuttle service, autonomous driving on demand. This would be a very, very nice project for the House of Digitization, that House of Digitization and BMW could support, or Mr. Schurman, if I think about data analysis, in order to be able to create new things, to act sustainably when doing our projects. And of course, also this is at the center of attention at the House of Digitization. So if we are successful in doing all of this, we will have made a lot of headway and we will have come up with several solutions. And I would like to say a most cordial thank you to you, Mrs. Horstmeier. Already guaranteed me your support.
Thank you so much. That's really what we want to hear. I'm sorry, we cannot hear you here. I'd like to close this conversation. Thank you so much of being members of the discussion here. Please stay with us for a second because Matt is somewhere around here. There you are. You have the last word. It's your turn.
Well, here's my last word. We appreciate the spirited audience feedback. Hannelore, you've handled this so professionally. We're going to take a little break now. It seems people are getting a bit restless, so it's time to get some food, maybe get some espresso. Be back here right at 2 o'clock because we're going to kick things off for the first time ever at the Austrian World Summit with a rock and roll band. They're from Austria, but they have members from Ukraine and Russia because we are really preaching this message that we can do more together. So thank you all. Enjoy your break. We'll see you back here at 2.